Well, hello there. Who are you?
This is the Zodiac speaking.
Killing must feel good to God, too. He does it all the time. And are we not created in his image?
We all go a little mad sometimes.
After all, murder is, or should be, an art.
I could kill you now pretty easily. Do some interesting things before anyone showed up.
What are these films you can't wait to look at?
Welcome to the Final Girls podcast and the 14th episode of our series dedicated to on-screen serial killers of horror film history. There comes a time in every millennial horror fan's life when they find a DVD of American Psycho in their local bargain bin and their life is changed forever. That's what happened to me. I'm your podcast host, Anna Bogutska, and in this episode, I'll be discussing the satirical horror masterpiece that is Mary Harron's film, American Psycho. Based on Bret Easton Ellis' controversial novel, in the film, Christian Bale stars as Patrick Bateman, Wall Street douchebag by day and serial killer by night. Patrick is highly moisturized and extremely violent. He's got 0% body fat and 0 inner life. Joining me is the brilliant film analyst and podcaster Mary Wild to discuss the mask of Patrick Bateman and what, if anything, lies beneath it. We're about halfway through the serial killer series now, and there's many more films and some TV shows to come. Let me know what you think of the series so far on socials. You can find me at Anna B. Demented or at The Final Girls UK, or drop me a line on hello@thefinalgirls.co.uk. If you're enjoying the podcast and you want to show some support, you can leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or head over to the Patreon where you can find more in-depth conversations about new horror releases and a monthly horror book club. All of this will be linked in the show notes. And with all of that said, please enjoy our take on American Psycho. Any excuse to give Patrick Bateman a bit more time.
I mean, it's what he would want.
I don't know if that is a bracelet I want to wear. What would Patrick Bateman want?
I know.
So, Mary, before we get into your friend and mine, Patrick Bateman, I wanted to ask you about what you think of when you think of serial killers in the movies.
Hey, Anna, thanks for having me back, first of all. Nice to be back. So I think psychologically that serial killers are so interesting because when you think of someone committing a single murder, obviously they should face justice and serve time. But one might imagine that that one instance of fatal violence occurred in the heat of the moment, maybe, and that they're not capable of ever repeating the killing. But the notion of serial killing is terrifying because the perpetrator has done this multiple times. So it kind of begs the question, what kind of mind would be compelled to do this? You know, it implies a deeper psychological sickness than just a one-off and something more evil.
And why do you think movies are so fascinated with this figure?
Well, I think because the serial killer, by nature, the different events of killings happen like vignettes, like they're like little chapters, right? Mm-hmm. And so structurally, it lends itself a lot more to the cinematic genre because you have all these different scenes, you know?
I love
that kind of play out. And then it repeats. And that's really what film is also. There's so much repetition and like different scenes happening, but they may differ slightly in content, but then you kind of step back and you see they have things in common. Often these serial killers, you know, they have a certain style, they have a signature style. So it's the same with like narrative construction in cinema, motif and theme building. And I think that's why it just lends itself so well to the cinematic format.
We're both here to talk about mostly the film adaptation, but also the wider cultural footprint of both the book and the film American Psycho. And before we get into the nitty-gritty of it, tell me, what is your own relationship with American Psycho?
I love the book and the film. They're both masterpieces that I re-engage with again and again. You could say that I'm a serial enjoyer of American Psycho.
When did you first read? Did you watch the film first or did you read the book first?
I watched the film first.
Me too.
And I was completely like captivated, weirdly captivated by this strange guy and his story. And then I went and read the book. And I know that the book is not to everybody's taste. It is very tedious. We were just talking off mic before. You know, the style is very repetitive. It can get very, very tedious. But weirdly enough, I know this might be shocking to admit publicly, but there's something about the rhythm of the book and Bret Easton Ellis's style of writing that I find meditative. Even though he's describing the most horrific things ever, there's something about the pace and the pattern of what happens and the detailing, you know, the listing and the kind of obsessive dwelling on everything that I find strangely like calming and soothing. I mean, some people will download the Calm app to like chill out and relax. I have my American Psycho audiobook that I listen to.
I mean, it's interesting because I read the book when I was a teenager and very much in my Bret Easton Ellis edgelord era. I watched the film first, so I kind of had Christian Bale's voice and those performance choices in my head as I was reading it. And even though off mic I was saying I was revisiting the book in advance of this recording, and it is exactly like I remember it, that tediousness of the listing. But what I will say is that I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that stems from the characters and the world that he's portraying. So it's very deliberate. It is just bursting with what we might call product placement. It's just this brand porn of objects, clothes, restaurants, reviews of pop culture. Everything is so stuffed that it becomes meaningless. But every once in a while, he has these sentences that are very eerie. And they catch you off guard because in the midst of all of this tedious listing of stuff, right, and places and what they call hard bodies, which is the word that the characters in the book use to refer to women, suddenly there's a sentence that is truly very, very weird and revealing, you know, like Patrick looking at his reflection when he meets someone and kind of complimenting himself in his head. You know, like this constant obsession with homeless people and the descriptions of them on the street. It's very strange. I can absolutely see why this book captured the imagination and provoked such an intense reaction at the time when it was released.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And what you just described, you know, these little slippages of eeriness and uncanniness kind of thrown into the mix of the kind of tedium of obsessing about objects and places. I think that is structurally so compelling, and it caught me unawares, you know, also when I read it for the first time. I wasn't expecting that. And it's the kind of literary highlight of the experience of American Psycho. And as for the film, you know, Mary Harron's film is one of my favorites of all time at this point. And I kind of like that we share a name. You know, we're a little bit of Mary on Mary action today. I also just want to give a little plug, actually, since I'm just remembering it, that I had a fashion designer from New York called Vicky Rocco appear as a guest on my Patreon channel, and we did a whole villain profile on Patrick.
Oh,
so
wow.
For anyone listening, if you want to, you know, just yet another conversation, as if one were not enough, then you know, hop on to that and check it out.
So tell me then about, you know, what about this film struck you when you first watched it, and how has that how has your relationship with it changed over the years that it's become one of your all-time favorites?
When I first watched it, I was firstly very impressed by the star-studded cast. Interestingly, apparently, Leonardo DiCaprio was first regarded as possibly being cast in the role of Patrick Bateman, which thank God that didn't happen, because he just had a baby face at the time and he wouldn't have been right, I think. He had too much baggage too from Titanic. And so it just wouldn't have worked. So Christian Bale is perfect. I really loved, I was already a big fan of the rest of the cast too at the time that I watched it. So it was a nice ensemble cast. But what really struck me was the kind of juxtaposition and the contrast between the intent of Patrick to curate his life with all these clean lines. Nothing is ever out of place. His apartment is spotless. All his suits are perfectly, sorry, let me say that again. All his suits are perfectly tailored. He's never got a hair out of place. And yet this is pitted against unbridled violence that he commits, allegedly, right? And just that tonal shift, and the thematic drastic leap really kind of stunned me. I don't think at the time I had ever seen anything quite like that before. I thought that Mary Harron was a very stylish director. And since then, I've watched it countless times because I've taught this film many times in my lectures, maybe more than a dozen times. I've definitely seen it more than a dozen times. And each time I watch it, I like it even more. Like, it just keeps on giving. I notice more details and just little instances of creepiness, but also hilarity. It's also a very funny film.
It's so funny. And I want to talk about that later for sure.
For sure.
And it's I was trying to remember when I was rewatching it. I've watched this film a number of times. I don't know how many, but the last few times, and it's been a number of years now between rewatches, I watched it on the big screen for the first time at the BFI, and I had to do a panel afterwards. And I'd never seen it on the big screen. This is one of my all-time DVD movies that I picked up at a bargain bin somewhere and watched, and became one of my defining, you know, teenage films. And I think at that point, superficially, it was the abrasiveness of it, but also the fact of these images, especially of a very superficially perfect looking, perfect built Patrick Bateman being covered in blood and describing things, his narration in such a monotonous voice. I think that contradiction in tones really stuck with me. But then when I rewatched it in preparation for this last week, I was cackling the entire way through. The precision of the performances, the details, all the supporting cast in the script, but also it really struck me how actually all the violence was filmed, and the set design in particular I definitely want to chat about. So it's an incredible film that has been sort of twisted by its own pop culture legacy, but I can also see why it's been, you know, twisted in the way that it has. I watched it kind of in the peak Tumblr era, so sometimes GIFs and memes of Patrick Bateman would pop up, but I was also discovering Bret Easton Ellis's work at that time, so his whole, you know, nihilistic 80s LA vibe was present. But I do find it really interesting what Patrick Bateman is becoming now and how unironically some people have read this film.
For sure.
So let's talk from the very start about the opening credits, because I never paid attention to them until this rewatch, and I find that they really set the tone of the film very well. How do they set us up for what American Psycho is?
Yeah, sure. So thinking about the opening credits, it just, for me, it's giving straight up 1980s marketing.
Yes.
You know, all style and completely devoid of substance. If you recall, like, even just when there's this, like, whatever that substance is, you know, the raspberry coulis or pomegranate jus that's sort of like dripping on the plate as if it's blood. So the implication is that the yuppie lifestyle Patrick and his friends subscribe to has a certain violent undertone to it. You know, they present as being so civilized and sophisticated and have such fine taste and exquisite know-all about culture. But yet there's something structurally evil going on here. There's something oppressive at work that none of them are really articulating. And the paradox is that they look so fancy, you know, at these stylish New York restaurants, but none of the markers of their wealth can cover up their unbridled aggression. And so, like, even while they're at the restaurant, you know, they're making like racial slurs. It's so bizarre, you know, what they're talking about. And then they go off to this nightclub where Patrick orders a drink and has an exchange with the bartender, you know, the female bartender behind at the bar. And he threatens her. You know?
But nobody hears him.
Exactly, because it's like drowned out by the music. And for me, this is also perfect because it sets up these people, like Patrick and his little cohort, as, again, all style, no substance. There's something evil lurking underneath the pretty surface.
Well, I think that's really accurate, and I think the title credits, which I think then Dexter, the TV series, was probably very heavily inspired by, because it's these extreme close-ups of these really fancy high-end meals, you know, the kind where it's 90% plate and 10% food. And somehow I just love this kind of contradiction of it's the image of 1980s wealth, but it's not richness. There's nothing rich here. This food is unappealing. It's very clinical. The white of the linen in the credits is so it's so blank, you know, and blankness and emptiness is something that Patrick will bring up when he talks about himself, but that both in the book and in the film is a constant about this milieu, right? Like they talk all the time. And as I was rereading the book, I was like, this dialogue is so sharp, and it's lifted sometimes. Entire scenes are lifted from passages in the book because the dialogue is so cinematic. It reads like this intense back and forth. They're yappity yapping all the time, but they say absolutely nothing. They reveal so much about themselves, but there's really not that much going on. They're just talking about places, about stuff they bought or they're gonna buy, about their workout routine, about women they fucked or they want to fuck, and about the coke that they've done or they're gonna do. And there's literally not a single substantial element to them whatsoever.
Yeah, exactly. And it's so funny because they're probably speaking in this filler style where they're just like populating the atmosphere with signifiers that mean nothing, probably as a defense, as a buffer, so that they can hide behind the cloud of nothingness. But as you said, you know, they actually betray themselves through this speech style. They do ultimately reveal kind of their mediocrity.
Oh, absolutely.
And so it is rather amusing.
So let's talk about Patrick in
Yeah.
particular. And Patrick is all about surfaces. And I'm interested in, what do you think? How does Patrick define himself?
Well, I think that Patrick is extremely invested in maintaining his perfect body. You know, he has a comprehensive multi-step skincare routine, and he's a fashionista, you know? I love referring to him as a fashionista. He admittedly has excellent taste in clothes and accessories. And I would say that you know, it's almost a redeeming quality, but it's actually a symptom of a pathological superficiality in his case. He's a non-entity. He's in a kind of he's caught up in an existential void. So he relies on high-end products and designer labels to cover up his lack. And the way that he defines himself is through all of these kind of materialistic pursuits. There is no personality beyond that, you know? And you know, this is a reflection of the rise of neoliberal economics under Reagan and Thatcher in the 80s. So it is a kind of like clarion call to the vapid culture of consumerism. You know, kind of like signaling an alarm, really, against a vapid culture of consumerism. And Patrick, you know, you could be forgiven. I mean, I kind of was charmed initially when I saw that character on film. I thought, wow, he just looks so good, and he has such a great eye for fashion. You know, one would be forgiven looking at him thinking that he's a man of great taste. But the thing about him is that he's really just a database of what he's collected, observing human beings in his attempt to mimic humanity, because he has no humanity. He's some kind of psychopath. And so all of this is really just an attempt to LARP and to cosplay as a human being. And I think that he would even agree with that. You know, like he has that insight about himself that when he removes that peel off mask, you know, in the bathroom, he does say, there's an idea of Patrick Bateman, but I'm simply not there.
Yeah, some kind of abstraction.
Some kind of abstraction, exactly. He has that insight about himself, but he just has no means of developing a meaningful personality.
Well, it's interesting because it sounds so... There's two sides of me whenever I watch this film. On the one hand, I'm like, this sounds so superficially profound, but I think the profundity is very, very surface level. I know that's a contradiction in terms, but because Patrick is an unreliable narrator, if you delve a little bit further into the story, or like try to see things from his perspective, which is, you know, how the book is written. It's written in the first person, and the film is very much in his mind. None of everything he says is bullshit.
Yeah.
Because if we even believe him, then that's a bit too much depth for who he actually is. Because the emptiness that he's talking about is not the, you know, philosophical emptiness. There just isn't, there isn't anything that we associate with humanity or personality. Because as you say, he is pathologically superficial and uses whatever is popular or commercial or expensive as a substitute for personality traits. And I find it really interesting as well, because that applies to his routines, his skincare, his ab crunching routine, his exercise routine, the way his women, the way he sees sex, his friends, the people he works with. You know, I don't think he uses the word friend at any point, but his apartment. One of the first things he says about himself is that he lives on West 81st Street on the 11th floor, where he lives on the Upper West Side is so important to who he is, because that will tell us who he is. These things, right? This the business card, all the superficial textures are so violently important to him. But then there's these little glimmers, right, of something that is actually a bit more interesting, like, oh, Patrick Bateman doing crunches watching Texas Chainsaw Massacre,
Yes.
or trying to convince a woman who's completely zoned out on Xanax to go on a date while he's watching some violent porn in the background with a woman screaming. Like, those glimpses of his strangeness I actually find more compelling than his like sort of pseudo-nihilistic diatribes of like, oh, look at me, I'm so empty, aren't I a vessel for yuppie culture? I was like, you know what, no, wait. I think the real thing is that you're a loser with violent fantasies.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I think Patrick would have actually really flourished if he had been growing up or living in a time of like online communities where he could have like logged on and just talked to other people who were like maybe fans of horror movies. You know what I'm talking about? Like,
oh, he would have been a fitness influencer 1000%. I'm telling you, Mary. Listen, let me tell you, there's a little, can I do a little digression?
Yes.
There's I promise this is the last time I'm going to bring up TikTok, but, or maybe I'll do it one more time because there's a thing I want to mention. But there's a guy on TikTok that people have been calling the, you know, Gen Z Patrick Bateman, because
I think I know who you mean.
I don't remember his name, but what he does is he films himself steaming his pillowcases and his duvet and like exercising on his Peloton or whatever. And he's very, you know, superficially, skin is on point, he's very fit, all this. He is so clearly dead inside. Completely soulless, but so exacting in a very Patrick Bateman-esque way. Because you know this man steams his fucking pillows. You know
100%. 100%. I mean, it's a style of like, I think it is kind of like an obsessive compulsive disorder, you know, feeling that compulsion to repeat, go through all the steps methodically, you know, and all of this kind of busy work fills up your life. And then you convince yourself that these routines, these elaborate routines, these protracted, time-consuming rituals are your life. But ultimately, you've just done nothing. Like, that is the tragedy of people like Patrick Bateman. They're sort of like automatons.
Yes.
And you're absolutely right. It's those little slippages of social awkwardness and moments where he gets irritated and he sort of breaks from his script.
Yes.
And you can see flashes of genuine emotion, like whatever they may be disgust or anger. But those are more authentic than this uncanny kind of facade that he is so desperate to project all the time.
And it's interesting as well how his apartment on the Upper West Side it's one of the first things we see about him, you know, this curated bubble that he has for himself, and it's completely bare. And there's something I never noticed before, which is he literally has framed black squares on his walls. Did you notice that?
Yes.
It's just, there is nothing there. There's a poster for Les Mis, which he does mention at another point, over the toilet. Tons of products, but everything is stark white. Everything is empty. Everything is super clean. Everything is out of one of those architectural magazines where, you know, like a showcase apartment where nobody lives. Nobody could ever possibly live.
Like showrooms?
Exactly.
Oh, yes. Exactly. He is in a showroom. Exactly. You know, he really, everything with, you know, not just with Patrick, but everything is all style and no substance with Patrick and his jolly band of Wall Street wanker bankers, you know?
Well, what do you think is his relationship with his band of wanker bankers?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think that their motivation is to project wealth through the acquisition of slickly marketed luxury objects and access to these overpriced restaurants in order to signal elite group membership. And I really like what you said earlier about they have wealth, but not richness. You know, it's like a display of something kind of exotically ornate, but it's probably bland tasting. Like, you know, the actual experiential reality of this thing is literally nothing. And I think that Patrick and his friends, if you want to call them that, that's like a very, you know, I'm using the word very liberally here, very loosely. They are sort of like in a cult together, you know, they compete with and copy each other. And they wind up becoming interchangeable because they look similar in their clothes, in everything, and just their haircuts, you know, and it end up becoming this kind of undifferentiated, you know, monolith. And I want to also say that I believe that Patrick hates his friends and that the feeling is mutual. I think their interactions reek of resentment, rivalry, bitterness, passive-aggressive jabs, until they become real jabs, you know, with an axe. And Patrick has no real friends. This is just a group of avatars LARPing as a community because they all look alike and dress alike, and Patrick gets mistaken for different guys all the time. There's no authenticity or recognition of special qualities that make an individual, make a person. It's so fake.
I like that you use that word interchangeable because they are so, and I think deliberately so. I think both in the casting, and it's Josh Charles and Justin Theroux and a couple of other kind of recognizable faces, but they all, I would not be able to pick them out of a lineup. They all look exactly the same. They're so, and you know, my arch nemesis, Jared Leto, is obviously cast as one of them, which for once I think is perfect casting because you always want to cast Leto as a insufferable douche nozzle who you want to murder halfway through the movie.
Yes.
So good for American Psycho. But what I find really interesting is they're kind of, or at least Patrick, I don't know if you got the same vibe, but I think that he is so desperate to impress them. And I don't know why. I don't think he knows why. But I think it's not so much insecurity, but almost like some sort of imposter syndrome. Very violent imposter syndrome that he has. And even at the start of the film, he tells Evelyn very aggressively, Evelyn, his fiance, who's played by Reese Witherspoon, that he doesn't quit his job and he doesn't stop hanging out with these wanker bankers because he wants to fit in. So I think that desperate need to be exactly like they are is just this circular motion. They all want to be exactly like the other ones are. Indistinguishable from one another, but also somehow, you know, in a constant state of competition. And I think there's no better scene that exemplifies this than the business card scene.
Yes. Oh my, what a scene. Iconic.
I watched it like 3 times. I had to rewind it. How do you think Mary Harron pulls off creating such crushing tension in a scene of finance bros whipping out their little shiny business cards?
I mean, it is truly an achievement. Nobody ever would have guessed that such a humdrum moment in a boardroom could have been so compelling. But she fucking did that. She ate that. I would say, okay, I really like what you said there about this weird tension between these guys wanting desperately to be part of this undifferentiated mass and all present similarly in their appearance because this is how they signal group membership. But also, whilst in that kind of hive mind state, they are simultaneously always jockeying for power, always vying for position on the top. So it's a strange combination of wanting to be the same whilst also preserving a hierarchy. And this business card scene perfectly illustrates that problem. Because these cards are practically identical. It is hilarious that they should even perceive an iota of difference.
And also, they all have the same job title. They're all vice presidents. Vice president of what?
Of Nepo Baby. Like, seriously, exactly. They all have the same job title. None of them do any actual work. It's just posturing and grandstanding. But obsessing and like poring over the minute details of fonts and emboss this and that. I mean, you know, and just the way that Patrick looks so tormented, you know, and Mary Harron, you know, shoots in slow motion and captures close-ups to achieve the tension. The sound design and sweat on Christian Bale's brow are genius elements. And, you know, he really panics in response to the business card hierarchy. And just the way that he says, let's see Paul Allen's card. Like, the way that he says that line is so... He's suffering. It's fucking devastating.
It's like also the sound of swords being unsheathed when they pull out the cards. Like, this is their equivalent of a duel. And I think it's one of the slippages that you were talking about earlier of Patrick being all like cocky yuppie bro, and then suddenly the sweat and his trembling, because the other bros just kind of look at themselves like, what's going on here? Like, is this a big deal? And he's like trembling, and it's the same thing, you know. He's like, suddenly this in the book, the scene takes place in a restaurant, not in a boardroom. And he says, suddenly the restaurant seems far away, hushed, the noise distant, a meaningless hum compared to this card, and we all hear Price's words, raised lettering, pale nimbus white.
Oh my gosh. It is so funny.
Is that a gram? New card. What do you think?
Whoa. Very nice. Look at that.
Picked them up from the printers yesterday.
Good coloring.
That's bone. And the lettering is something called Cillian Braille.
It's very cool, Bateman, but that's nothing. Look at this. That is really nice. Eggshell with Romalian type. What do you think?
Nice.
Jesus.
This is what I mean by, and we were talking about this before, so let's kind of dig into this now. This is a comedy.
Oh, totally. If they had put different music to this, it would have been like a clown show of a dick measuring contest.
I think it already is a clown show of the dick measuring.
Oh, for sure. It is a total circus, but it would have just been, you know, literally like a literalized clown show with like goofy music. It would have just been so appropriate, you know, to switch up the music like that, because it is completely unserious, you know? Yes. But he is so bothered about something that is completely arbitrary, insignificant, and meaningless. And the way that he obsesses, for me, I mean, at no point did I ever feel like I didn't identify with him in the sense of like feeling sorry for him. If anything, as you said, all of this contributes to the humor and the comedic aspect of the book and the film, because you just look at him and think, wow, you really are a freak, aren't you?
Yeah. But also he's so, you know, I wonder as well what you think about how Patrick worries what other people think of him, and especially how he reacts when other people forget who he is or confuse him for someone else. Do you think he's like bothered or angry?
It's such a good question, because I don't think that Patrick registers in a meaningful way on the radar of people who know him.
Yes.
Just like other people don't register for him in a meaningful way. So when he's not mistaken for Paul Allen or Marcus Halberstram, you know, he's mocked openly and ridiculed. You know, so it's either mistaken identity or you're an idiot, Patrick, and everyone laughs.
Yes.
So I don't think this particularly like surprises or disappoints Patrick. I do think that he cares about people's opinion purely from a superficial standpoint. He's always in competition for outdoing someone from a consumer point of view. You know, he's keeping up with the Joneses purely at the level of materialism. But in terms of how he's regarded as a human being, I think it's neither here nor there. Honestly, I think that he is a nepo baby in a pond of other overprivileged, vacuous characters, and they all use each other transactionally to get ahead.
But he wants to be the biggest nepo baby in the pond of privilege. He has to be the one with the hardest abs and the highest apartment and the hottest fiance or the richest fiance, and the one who can get a reservation for Dorsey at 8 p.m. One of my favorite funny moments is when he calls. There's this recurring thing in the film, right, where Dorsey is like the hottest restaurant in New York at this point, and nobody can get a reservation. It's like a real dick measuring thing when someone manages to get a Dorsey reservation. And he calls them up and it's like, oh, can I get one for 8:30 tonight? And the host just laughs in his face. Well, laughs in the phone in his face. And you just see this, I wouldn't even call it rage. I think it's just this patheticness that Christian Bale can play so well. And make it so menacing. But I can also see how some people watching this film might feel righteously angry in these moments. And those are the people that I want to stay very far away from.
Yeah. Yes, please. Yeah, I don't want anything to do with that group of people who take it seriously, because, I mean, frankly, it's just, I was just actually thinking to myself that I remember back when Wolf of Wall Street got released, the Martin Scorsese film.
Yes.
It must have been like 2013 or something. I remember reading that some finance bros on Wall Street booked out a theater, like a movie theater in downtown Manhattan, watched the film, but totally unironically like punching the air.
Yeah, like taking notes.
Probably taking notes. And they were like celebrating. They're like, yeah, this is so cool. Like the irony was completely lost on them, you know? Like they genuinely thought that this was like a benevolent portrayal or something. And for anyone who's watching American Psycho and reacting in that way.
This is not an aspirational story.
No, it ain't. Like, you guys need to block my number. Like, I don't want to hear from you.
So, you know, we've mentioned him a little bit, but I want to talk for a while about Christian Bale and his performance, because I think we overuse the word iconic, but I'm going to use it here because in terms of performances and even in the scope of his that's the word. And even in the context of his career, where he's had a number of very high profile and really complicated roles that he's played, I think this is his most iconic performance. And yes, that I'm including Batman there. I think this is better. What do you think of him? Who he was at that time, how he plays him, all the stuff that he's doing with his face and with his body.
I mean, 10 out of 10 performance by Christian Bale. I agree with you. I think it is better than Batman. I think that if anything, he actually transferred Patrick Bateman onto Bruce Wayne and informed, I believe Bruce Wayne.
That's a take? Tell me more.
I mean, I'm a DC girl. I love DC comics. But I am Team Joker all the way. I think that I think Bruce Wayne is the real villain. And I think that Christian Bale, there's something about him. He is very good at portraying the dead behind the eyes condition of yuppies. And Bruce Wayne is definitely a yuppie. Particularly in American Psycho, you talked about the way that he contorts his face, which is so memeable. I can understand why he's a meme superstar.
Yes.
And it's because I've thought about it, like, why should that character be singled out, right? As so often memed. And I think it's because as a serial killer, we know that, psychopaths spend time in front of the mirror practicing emoting because they don't have remorse naturally. They don't have empathy for other human beings. On the spot, they wouldn't be able, like in a pinch, they wouldn't be able to like express emotion in a convincing way. So it has been documented that they stand in front of the mirror and practice emoting with pictures like taped to the wall of just mimicry. And I think that Christian Bale really, he just perfected that slightly fake contortion of the face where it's so exaggerated. It would be like someone who's just pretending to be human. And that's just funny, like when people are collecting memes and reacting to things with GIFs on, on the internet, it would make sense that it should be Patrick Bateman because it's one step removed from authentic reaction. You know what I'm saying?
That's so interesting because you're right. It's almost like and I think he's a phenomenal actor. So he's like a great actor playing someone who is not a good actor.
Yes, exactly.
So, and that is, it sounds, I think that's very complicated to do because if this was a role in the hands of a lesser actor, and this is why I think that Leo would have been such a bad choice, an actor who is overly concerned with their public persona and their star persona, this is not the right role for them.
No,
because there's even in some of his movements, like in the Paul killing scene, when he does the little like moonwalk. And just goes, "Hey, Paul," and slams the axe in his face. It's such an overly enthusiastic, kind of over-the-top performance. Like, in the hands of anyone else, this would land so badly. This would just be overacting 101. But he never crosses that line into overacting. It's this heightened masking that you were talking about. And when it slips, it's very inward in a way, but also even when it's inward, it's very exaggerated because he strikes me as like a guy who's never, maybe, as you say, if we're gonna diagnose him as a psychopath, doesn't have emotions, but he also doesn't know how to regulate whatever it is that he's feeling. Because I do think he's feeling something. He feels a lot of rage.
For sure.
He's very competitive. He's very insecure. And when that slips through, he's like a child. It's like he's one, business card away from a tantrum in the boardroom. He aggressively starts to do like 1,000 crunches if he doesn't get something he wants.
Yeah, exactly. No emotional regulation. He's not articulate emotionally whatsoever. So he's relied so much on this kind of performative gestures that sometimes those don't come naturally in the moment. So there's a slippage. I mean, I have it on good authority, by the way, that Christian Bale watched clips of Tom Cruise in the 1990s being interviewed on late night TV.
Stop it.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I love that.
To mimic the highly stylized robotic speaking style of Tom Cruise. He just like binge watched loads of clips to inform his performance for this. And he just perfectly captures like a deranged, murderous yuppie. And apparently Tom Cruise was inspo for that.
So I don't want to be sued. So all of what I'm saying is completely allegedly and very fabricated and based on absolutely nothing. And I love Tom Cruise as a movie star.
Same.
I find him so darkly fascinating.
Same.
In the sense that I think it makes complete sense once you've said it. In the performance of charisma, and I think he's a wildly charismatic actor.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
On screen, but every time I've seen interviews with him off screen, and I think increasingly over the years, it's kind of become very uncanny valley. Like,
Yes.
if you tell me that allegedly Tom Cruise got replaced by a robot 20 years ago, I'd be like, okay, well, that explains a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
There is such a strange inhumanity in the way that he performs himself in public. I find it very darkly compelling.
Oh, totally. Totally. I would love to watch a documentary, not even about like the kind of like sensational details of his involvement in Scientology or anything like that. I just want to know about, like, in a way, his persona, you know, like a documentary about the craftsmanship and the construction of his persona when he's off screen.
Oh my God, I'm scared. I'm scared.
Yeah.
I'm scared of even saying this into a microphone. I don't know if I should delete this, because genuinely, I think we'll never know.
Mm-hmm.
I think anyone who knows anything will never be seen again.
Yeah.
And I would love to see that documentary, but also I genuinely would be scared.
Yeah, it would genuinely be terrifying because it's such a black hole. It is an enigma.
Yes, I think a black hole is a great way of putting it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I don't actually care about like the personal life details that much.
No.
I do find the association with certain
very
powerful individuals fascinating because of the way that certain types of power attract other kinds of power.
Yeah, definitely. But I think that in a way, what is going on in Cruise is I think it's interesting and comparable to why Patrick Bateman, you know, is such an interesting character as well because of the mask wearing. I think that Patrick's mask is the image he's painstakingly curated for himself, this exterior shell consisting of perfect skin, perfect hair and nails, defined muscles, Valentino suits all over people's glasses. In Jungian psychology, this is the persona. That's what a persona is. It's the face we present to the world. Mm-hmm. But if an individual is all mask all the time, then there's no deeper, authentic self, just a hollow, brittle thing that gets crushed under the mask. And when Patrick says he's simply not there, I think that, you know, this is kind of what makes him, in many ways, the OG influencer pre-social media. You know, he's sort of this algorithm and a phantom who's like subliminally steering shopping behaviors. And that's about it.
Yeah. And he's not even steering them, is he? Because he's being steered. But
yeah.
Who do you think is the real Patrick Bateman? Or maybe I should say, who does he think is under the Patrick Bateman mask versus who he might actually be?
Well, I think that it's very subtle. You know, it's in the details. Patrick uses consumerism to escape something sinister about himself. You know, and this is his facade. The dead behind the eyes expression gives away how small and miserable Patrick really is. And the insecurity bubbles under the surface and comes out in this, you know, uncontrollable rage periodically, which, of course, Bill is great at releasing, you know, that pent up anger on screen. It is scary. But I think Patrick, I know it sounds so harsh to say this, but I think he is just an entity. I think he's nothing under the mask. That's his problem. He's an abyss. He is a black hole, you know? He's completely atomized in this false neoliberal culture and also alienated from other people, from relationships. But he's not just alienated, he is an alien in many ways. He's like an extraterrestrial landed on Earth cosplaying as a human being. And he watches and observes people and plays dress up as one of the boys, but has no humanity of his own And I think that Patrick collects data points about human beings by murdering them. Like the murder is a device, a technique that he's compelled to return to get to know people intimately. And he has insight about, his condition even, but the knowledge of it makes no difference whatsoever.
Mm-hmm. That's a beautiful description of a very despicable guy. And I think it's almost our instinct as viewers to try to prescribe him more meaning than he actually has, which makes him such a fascinating character to watch, because there's very little there inside that has meaning underneath the mask, but we keep trying to find it because I think it's very difficult for us to grasp that someone might be a void.
Yeah.
But you're right, he doesn't have any opinions of his own. He doesn't have any goals. He doesn't have any real wins or any real losses. And I think this is one of the ways that the film satirizes the idea of privilege. Ages before that word came into the mainstream lexicon and we kind of understood or are continuing to try to understand what having privilege and what the intersections of privilege are. I think for me, the fact is that nothing he does has any impact on anyone and on anything. Even the most extreme acts of murder. He murders people and nothing happens.
Yeah.
It simply does not matter. Nothing he does matters. And I think you're right about this beautiful way you put it of murdering people in order to collect data points. It's almost like, if I murder people, I will become human?
Yeah, almost as if like it's a way to connect with another person in an embodied way through the destruction of their body. It's so paradoxical, but you could say that for a serial killer, the continuous act of killing that's how they maintain relationships with others. That's how sick it is that it's come to that. The relationship is the murder, because that's how they get to know humanity through suffering. And yeah, he is. I love that you brought that up about he has no impact, that there's no ripple effect of this person in any context. If he does a good deed, it doesn't matter. If he kills someone, he doesn't get caught. If he confesses, he doesn't go to jail. Nothing ever happens. There is no consequence. It's as if he was never there. He never existed.
Exactly. And, I think it's high time that we talk about the actual horror of American Psycho. How does Mary Harron film the murderers? And how does Patrick kill? Who does he kill? How does he murder people?
So in the film, Patrick kills several people. I'm going to list off a few. I may miss some, and I might ask you, but he kills. I think that he ends up killing early on a random woman he meets on the street. It's sort of implied. The murder is not shown, but then we discover that he has bloody sheets, which he takes to the dry cleaner, and he tries to convince them that it's like cranberry juice or something. And whenever he gets questioned about anything, he's like, his excuse is that he has to return some videotapes. Iconic. Oh my God.
Best excuse ever. I'm so sad that it doesn't apply anymore.
I know. Look what they took from us, Anna.
I know. What are we left with? Oh, I have to go. Well, I actually do have to return a couple books to the library, so I always have that.
Yeah, thankfully. Civilization hanging by a thread.
Yeah, but what I'm gonna do is like, I gotta pick up dry cleaning. Who am I? No, I don't.
Yeah, I gotta go download this MP4 or something like that.
Oh, well, I'll tell you what is probably very applicable now. Oh, I gotta go mail some things that I sold on Vinted or something.
Yeah. Exactly. Oh my God. And so another person that he kills quite early on in the film is a homeless man called Al. He hacks away at Paul Allen in his apartment. He kills a sex worker with a chainsaw. And then he goes on a like rampage through downtown Manhattan. And I think he shoots a few like maybe security guards or something. It's hard to know.
Hilarious rampage. Also, he tries to, but does not kill a cat.
Oh, yeah. Oh, God. Justice for that kitten. Yeah, that was unacceptable. And Mary Harron sets up Paul Allen's murder in the apartment on top of the newspaper style section lining the floor.
Yeah.
And I think, there's something poetic going on here because Paul's blood spills and even if fleetingly gives substance to the style. I mean, this is what Patrick craves, like some consequence because he is all style and no substance. And so for the blood to soak through the style section, it's almost like giving the style some dynamism temporarily, but it doesn't last. No. It's always evading him. The substance is always, leaking out and evading. The scene of a naked chainsaw-wielding Patrick Bateman chasing after a sex worker follows a brief moment also where he's shown frantically doing stomach crunches with Texas Chainsaw Massacre playing in the background of his living room. And I think here Harron is making the link between Patrick and Leatherface swinging the chainsaw around.
Yes, but also it's this... I found that scene again quite comical. Because what I found really curious is that we don't actually see him... We see him murder people. Mm-hmm. But Harron doesn't actually film the murders. I think she films him stabbing the homeless man.
Yeah.
But we don't actually see the hacking of Paul.
No.
He throws the chainsaw down the stairs. Mm-hmm. And we don't see it hit the sex worker who he calls Christy. I believe, although that's a fake name that he decides to give her. So we see a lot of him covered in blood. Again, kind of playing on this image of this beautiful surface, disturbed and destroyed and perverted by the presence of Vlad. And I found that to be, again, one of these images that we associate so much more violence with Patrick than we actually see him perform, because we're seeing the effects of it. We're seeing all the blood splatter, all the imagery of it. But also the body's hanging in the closet, the bloodied linen sheets. But she does spare us the gruesomeness. We don't actually see that much of it, which I think, again, is one of the weird contradictory elements of the legacy of this film. Mm-hmm. But I find the death of Paul to be a real turning point. So because it's the first time that he kills someone from his world.
Yes.
As opposed to someone who he sees as beneath him, as subhuman. He does not see a homeless person as a person. He doesn't see sex workers as people. Yeah. He's completely he's in a bubble within a bubble. So when he kills Paul, or he thinks he kills Paul, it's the beginning of his unraveling. And I think also it's the one murder that feels most premeditated because of that newspaper and the trench coat that he wears for the splatter.
Yes.
Like he's already thinking of cleanup in advance.
Oh, yeah. Yes, definitely. It's premeditated because he also took Paul Allen out to some like Mexican restaurant or something. Mm-hmm. And he got him drunk. Yes. So, and he remained sober that night so that he could, proceed with his sinister plan. Mm-hmm. So yes, it was all very consciously like deliberated on. And you're right. He does spiral after that because killing one of his own would probably break something really vital in him, because that's when he starts to, it's like auto cannibalism. He's like turning on his own kind, And because he lacks identity so much, he's associated his selfhood so much with this group that the fact that he believes he's murdered one of that cohort hacks away at an essential part of this, shambolic self he's sort of constructed. He's sort of cobbled together.
Yeah, well, it starts all breaking apart. He can't, that mask doesn't hold anymore. And I was wondering as well, we mentioned his fiancée Evelyn, the sex workers he murders. There's also his assistant Jean, played by Chloe Sevigny. The several women from his milieu that he also sleeps with, like Courtney, and the other woman the other character's name I forget, who's played by this co-screenwriter of the film, Genevieve Turner. How does the film portray women and Patrick's relationship to them?
Well, I think the film portrays Patrick as being incapable of love. He goes after women he believes he can exploit in some way and can benefit him in some way. The relationship with his fiancée, Evelyn, is totally fake and purely transactional. Okay. It's motivated only by, aspirations of social mobility. It's like a marriage of convenience. And I think both ways, it's fair to say. And then he takes advantage of Courtney, the woman he has an affair with. But she's barely conscious because she's always on prescription drugs most of the time that they're together. I mean, it would be impossible to connect with someone at that level when they're always hopped on, when they're always like strung out on something. So that is also problematic and very kind of exploitative. He also manipulates and physically tortures sex workers like they're blow-up dolls. There's absolutely no respect for their dignity, for their, agency or autonomy whatsoever. They're purely transactional for him. And to me, like, the only relationship that stands apart is Jean, his assistant, played by Chloe Sevigny. Jean does seem to be the only woman he marginally respects. And I'm saying that very loosely here. I don't think he's capable of real respect for anybody. But he marginally makes an effort to talk to her. Whatever. I mean, it's like cordial, Well,
I think it's because she idolizes him.
She idolizes him. Yeah.
He even introduces her as like, oh, Jean, my assistant, who's in love with me.
Oh, totally. He recognizes that there's an affection on her side. And he probably enjoys that. He probably enjoys the attention. But I also think there's something else there. Because she's in an assistant role for him. She's a subordinate, and she takes care of him in her capacity as his employee. I believe that this feature of Jean as kind of like a nurturer is something he desperately craves, like a child craves his mother. There's something maternal between him and Jean because she's taking care of him in some ways.
And she's the only one also who gets spared.
Yeah, this is why he allows her to live. There's so many brushes, a very comedic scene of her in his apartment, and he's glancing at different weapons to use on her. And it's so extreme. It's so funny, but he never does anything. He gets more panicked that night over her leaving a mark on his table while she's eating ice cream or something.
Oh God, yeah, totally. But then once she compliments his thinness, he sort of lets her go. I do find his relation, and we should say that both the book and the film where drew quite a lot of criticism, particularly the book, for being misogynistic or for its portrayals of women. And obviously this is directed and written by two women, and especially Genevieve Turner kind of really had not read the book. had no idea about it until it was this project presented itself to her by Mary Harron. They were working together on a Betty Page biopic, and the intention to make something quite feminist is there, and it's so in the text. And I think the sex workers are particularly interesting in that scene because they are so bored by Patrick and his bullshit. They are openly rolling their eyes.
Yes.
There's several times they exchange glances with each other, like before he gets very violent. They're kind of like, oh my god, this fucking guy, can you believe it? Jesus. It's so there. Like, they completely see through his pathetic mask. And the scene where he's having sex with them, he's looking at his own reflection and, you know, flexing his biceps for himself. They could not give less of a shit. It's so completely disinterested in him, and all the other women as well in his life except Jean do not give a shit about Patrick, who he pretends to be or who he really is. They simply do not care.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Jean is the exception. She's the only one who seems to be like maybe having a crush on Patrick or something like that. All the other women can see right through his mansplaining ways. And I mean, Courtney even has to like get herself high on drugs, even just to spend time with Patrick because he's so boring.
He is really boring, and there's a line in the book that I found really revealing where I can't remember what character he's talking about, but he says, even though I would quite like to have sex with her body, he completely dehumanizes women from their bodies.
Yes.
And
yeah, he calls them hard bodies.
Yes. Well, they all do all the time, and they have this great speech in the film where they're like, you know, the only girls with a good personality are the ugly girls, and actually lol, there are no women with good personalities.
Yeah. God. Yeah, absolutely. But Mary Harron is so good at exposing this bullshit. And like treating it in the correct lens, which is just completely objective. Like let them say what they feel compelled to say, and it becomes apparent just how hollow these people are.
Well, and also because I think, you know, and going back a little bit to what we were talking about, the way that the film is perceived or its legacy in pop culture. I don't know if this has always been the case. I think it might have been. Sorry, let me rephrase that. I think it might have always been the case that some audiences and critics even think that a filmmaker, by making a film about characters that are unsavory or unlikable or violent or reprehensible in some way, are endorsing those characters. And I think both the book and the film, particularly with the Wanker Banker group, I don't think it's an endorsement. And of course it's satirical, but actually the precision of those characters is so astute, but it does neither the book nor the film forgives them. They're not asking for our forgiveness, but the fact that they're portrayed so well does not mean that Bret Easton Ellis or Mary Harron are encouraging or endorsing that behavior. And I think it's something that we've kind of sometimes blurred the lines between. Just because Scorsese does a film about a Wall Street con artist does not mean that he endorses that behavior.
Exactly. I happen to agree with you totally. I think that when it comes to artists and what they feel inspired to portray, you know, I honestly believe, like, if it has artistic merit, if it's interesting, worthwhile engaging with, you know, it can transgress any limit it wants, because it's fiction, and it's an engagement with something from the shadow, you know, from the shadow self. And that's worth preserving, you know?
We have to talk about the ending.
Yes.
Which I think is one of the most divisive elements of the film and the book. Do you think that Patrick's confession means anything? His tearful, sweaty, snotty confession to his attorney.
I don't want to leave anything out here. I guess I've killed maybe 20 people. Maybe 40. I have tapes of a lot of it. Some of the girls have seen the tapes. I even, I ate some of their brains. Oh, and I tried to cook a little. Tonight, I just had to kill a lot of people. And, I'm not sure I'm gonna get away with it this time.
And where do you stand on the ending? Do you think that all of Patrick's murders that we see in the film are real, or are they all in his mind, or some real and others are not? What's your take?
I love the ending of this movie. That scene where he frantically calls his lawyer and confesses everything and says, I've killed 20, maybe 40 people. I've killed a lot of people.
That's a big jump to not remember, my guy, okay? Like, he's a 20 or is a 40? Because that's like a lot of people in between there, you know?
Yeah, there's a whole ballpark
it's
in
giving
between.
Henry Lee Lucas, you know? Yeah. Was it 40? Was it 400? Okay, that 10 is a big difference, Henry.
Oh my God, that's so funny. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, like he's so desperate, right, to make that human leap forward and confess his sins, like bare his soul and show another human being, look at me, look at the state of me, I'm breaking down, you know? But I think that ultimately his confession means absolutely fuck all. Like it means it means nothing. I mean, even just the way, like there's so many little moments along the way to that where he does reveal himself and no one even bats an eye. Like when he says to Paul Allen, I like to dissect girls. Did you know I'm utterly insane? Like,
okay, Pat.
You know what? Yeah, I know. And you know, he does sort of come clean. And he can do it all he likes, but no one will ever take anything he says or does seriously. He will always evade punishment and so must accept his perpetual crushing sense of shame. Mind you, I have to just say one thing as well. The title American Psycho, the psycho part doesn't specify whether Patrick is a psychopath, like an actual serial killer, or a psychotic, i.e. merely delusional and a fantasist. That he's like just fabricated all of this in his own head. And my view, I think that it can honestly flip either way. I think that the beauty of the book and the film is that it leaves just enough of a gap in the narrative that he could really be either. Yes. You know, he could have just made up all of these scenarios in his head. As we know, like Gene finds his like little book where he's doodled all this stuff and it's getting like progressively more insane. He might have just been obsessing and detailing and listing murders in his head, never actually going through with any of the violence. But he just believes his own fiction. And it doesn't even matter. That's also the other layer of the nihilism. Whether he killed anyone or not doesn't even matter. Even at that material level, there's no consequence. He suffers just as much either way, and there is no exit from this hell.
I am with you in part. On the one hand, I think that is absolutely the point, that there is no decisive answer. And I've heard interviews with Bret Easton Ellis where he's also said that even as he was writing it, and even now years later, he doesn't know whether those murders were real or not. And I think that's a great character portrait. On the other hand, although I love how you say it, I think one of the most challenging and enduring things about this film is that we could not give less of a shit about Patrick Bateman. Like, this is like he's in hell. He's in an emotional hell. He can't escape. Good.
Exactly.
I don't give a shit, Patrick. I really don't. And I find that, like, that's quite a complicated feeling to have with a film, right? Because are you watching someone murder people? In which case, they're a psychopath, as you were saying. Or, as you said, are they psychotic and they're having a psychotic break? In which case, that is kind of fascinating, but engenders a bit more empathy and sympathy, because this is someone suffering
sick.
Who is sick. But can he be both? Because, like we were saying before, he is a void underneath the moisturized, exfoliated, hard body mask. There's nothing there. Whatever remnants of humanity is there are so pathetic and uninteresting and unimpactful that you're like, oh, so you can't even be a good serial killer, Patrick. You try to do the one thing that your privilege will allow you to get away with, and you can't even do that right.
Yeah. Oh my God, that is so true.
How inadequate are you? You can't even fucking murder anyone.
You flopped at the one thing you could have got away from that the rest of us would have been held responsible for.
Literally, it's like you flop in your fantasies even. Because that final fantasy of him like having a shootout with the police, first of all, I love that performance, that particular scene. There's so many moments in this movie, in Bale's performance, that are just beautiful, just like to be rewatched constantly. And there's this moment where the police car just explodes from one bullet, and he just looks at his own gun like, what? It's like his fantasies run away from him. He can't even control his inner life.
Yeah. It's almost like slapstick at that point.
It's so slapstick. And like Bale plays him as like this neurotic nerd who's just discovered like Adobe Premiere and like some how to add explosions into something. He's like, oh, I'm gonna put an explosion here, I'm gonna put some blood over here. It's like, oh my God, I've made him Spielberg. He thinks he's the like James Cameron of murder, and he just isn't.
No. Oh my God, that is so funny. Someone please get this commentary on like a DVD special feature or something. I love it.
I love this film, and I love how both the author and the filmmakers of American Psycho seem to really, and the actor seem to despise him. And he is quite despicable, but weirdly not because of the murders, which I also believe that he doesn't actually commit.
Yeah.
I think it's all kind of in this heightened first person perspective almost. But it's the fact that he even flops at his fantasies.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's no coming back from that. Yeah, exactly. Like psychoanalytically, he's a very sort of flat subject, isn't he? Like,
oh yeah, I love that.
And, like there's not a lot of there's just not a lot of complexity. So he just is really a kind of accumulation of filler.
Yes.
Well,
literally filler, because he does look like he like does a little injections here and there, because that final shot, Mary, of his face, I don't know if you noticed this, but the older I get, the more into skincare I get. And I was looking at his routine, I was like, oh, that's a bit much, right? But fine, you're 27, so everything's gonna work. But then that final shot, and I think always throughout the film, I think it's deliberate, his skin has a sheen that is a bit too much. It's like that, that Margiela, the sorry, it's not Margiela. It's for the Margiela show that went gangbusters a few months ago. The Pat McGrath.
Oh yeah.
Like porcelain doll makeup. That then the models had to like take off in one piece, almost like the mask that Patrick takes off in the film. He has that like porcelain sheen that makes him look inhuman, just a bit too shiny, a bit too slick.
It's almost like they applied too much foundation or something, and it looks like, it's not that it looks cakey, but it looks like he's just a mannequin.
Yeah, it does not look like human skin.
No, not at all. It looks synthetic.
Yes.
And that is such a great shot. And they must have done it deliberately because they really went over the top. I mean, definitely like throughout the film, you even see him going to the spa. Like he you know, he loves his treatments. He loves his products and he's consistent, you know, we know that. But you're right. That final like zoom in close up scene where he says, you know, where he delivers that fantastic line, something like, my confession will have meant nothing. He does look just like a mannequin.
Yeah.
Like the last possible ounce of humanity has been drained out of him. And also, this is happening while him and his little buddies are like in this lounge watching TV, and they're watching a speech of Ronald Reagan.
Yes, I mean,
and
it's between Reagan and Trump in this movie and the book. There's so much of that.
There's so much of that because Trump is this other kind of like aspirational figure in the book, you know, like
well, he's described as Patrick's idol.
Exactly. I mean, I'm sure that Patrick Bateman would have, you know, modeled himself on like a Manhattan dandy like Donald Trump in those years, you know? I'm not sure I would use the word dandy to describe Donald Trump today, but...
Well, and also a Nepo baby who has so psychotically crafted his own narrative about himself that he just ignores things like facts or reality.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Totally delusional. But also just with Reagan, like when the Justin Theroux character asks about whether, you know, we can believe Reagan when he's smiling, you know, while he's delivering all this kind of speeches about war and imperialism and all this stuff. And the question is like, you know, is he's actually, you know, the idea is that like they're poking holes in his persona and talking about him being an evil character underneath this mask. So I think it's like perfectly in harmony with Patrick's crisis, because really he's not going to be able to manage the upkeep of this mask for very much longer. I would love for there to be like a prequel of American Psycho, or maybe even a follow-up of what happens in his 30s or 40s.
Are you ignoring American Psycho 2?
Oh, God.
Starring Mila Kunis.
And I tried to forget about that.
I tried to gently make Mary watch it, and she was absolutely not. It's the one film I turned off.
Open to anything than that. Like, I mean, wow. Like, what was going on with American Psycho 2? Like, seriously. I mean, I do like Mila Kunis a lot. So,
well, I believe, and I have seen this film, although obviously I remember nothing of it because I have a very selective memory. I believe that this film was a standalone thing that they then kind of tacked on to American Psycho to essentially take advantage of the name recognition. They did this. They tried to do the same with 7 as well. They tried to sell a sequel called 8.
Oh no!
But then everyone involved with 7 was like, absolutely not, over my dead body. And then they just actually made the film and released it as something else. It's another serial killer movie with Colin Farrell and Anthony Hopkins.
Oh, okay.
But that was originally designed or pitched to be 8.
That's so funny.
But sorry, Mary. Yeah. Before I let you go, I wanted to ask you, where do you see the current cultural impact of American Psycho?
Well, I think that the film is mostly looked at fondly today in terms of having comedic value. And people always comment about how funny Patrick is, and he certainly is a meme superstar. I think that's never going to stop.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think American Psycho appears to be co-opted without a trace of irony by influencer culture, especially when it comes to product listing and morning routine vlogs. It's like he's sort of like, I mean, Vicky Rocco says this in my discussion with her. The fact that his spirit lives on in these influencers and just, influencer culture in general, as what you described before with the TikToker.
Yes.
That is the spirit of Patrick Bateman. That's the legacy.
Oh God. Geez. Oh my God. The Get Ready With Me videos. That's the spirit of Patrick Bateman.
Oh yeah, totally.
The This Is What I Eat in a Day videos.
Yeah.
All the influencer shtick about, this workout is gonna destroy your core or give you a fat ass. You're like, oh God.
Yes, exactly. It's very clickbaity, It's very sort of like just I don't know, like a brain worm always like there to repeat. Yeah, and the thing is, it's I think the defining quality of all of this is that it's a hamster wheel of never-ending desire. It's just desire in the sense of not desirability, but being in a perpetual state of wanting more. Like Patrick is always competing with his friends, always like vying for the next move, the next restaurant reservation, the next this, the next that. It's never enough. You're never satiated. You're never satisfied. You're always hungry because you're trying to stay thin. Like diet culture is a big part of this. There's no enjoyment. There's no embodiment. There's no sinking into the present time. It's kind of like this.
There's no pleasure.
There's no pleasure. There's no pleasure.
Nobody takes any pleasure from anything. Nobody takes any pleasure from their beautiful apartments, from their gorgeous clothes, from the exquisite food that they're eating. They're always numbing themselves to the things that they're trying so hard to purchase, to give them meaning.
Absolutely. And they are hoarders.
Yes.
They are hoarders. Which is so paradoxical because they present these clean lines in their apartment and they're so like minimalist, don't you know? Mm-hmm. But all of these clothing hauls, like these items of clothing are going somewhere. There's a storage facility somewhere where you are a hoarder and you are deranged, like collecting all of these things that you can't get rid of. And you're getting crushed underneath the weight of that. I mean, physically and existentially.
Well, and also interestingly, Patrick also hoards the bodies.
Yes, he does. Exactly. They pile up.
And he keeps them in his closet in this apartment. And then when they all disappear, he's so unsettled by it.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't know, and we don't know whether they were ever even there, whether they've been taken away. And you kind of tell which possibility is more disturbing to him.
Exactly. He's so unsettled because he was getting a type of reassurance and comfort from the pylon, like he somehow found like some, as crazed as it is to say, he found some peace in why? Because it was proof of something he did, consequence of what he did.
Yes, it was proof. And it's also, is it terrible that someone found out what he did? Or is it terrible that they took away proof of what he did?
Exactly. See, I think it's the latter.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah. He's just desperate for a marker, any sign that he has been here with us. Because he's just this entity that's freely floating in the ether.
That doesn't exist?
That doesn't exist. He's like this abyss or black hole. And I think a lot of this influencer culture is similar. Like they want to have an impact, they want to feel like they've had a ripple effect on our decisions. Like they've mattered to us. We've had this parasocial relationship and I've bought a product because of their recommendation. Something they said or did mattered. I mean, I don't want to say that all of these beauty influencers are motivated in that way. Some of them truly are just professionals and they do give really good recommendations. And I follow a lot of them, like genuinely. So a lot of them are fantastic and they're real pros too. Like there's no bullshit. But I gotta say, there's a few who are very Patrick Bateman. Can I just share?
You must send me their handles. Kim K. Kim K is our Patrick.
Yes, definitely.
1000%.
1000% Kim is Patrick. Yes.
Mary, is there anything else about our favorite psychopath, our favorite non-entity Patrick Bateman that we haven't covered that you wanted to make sure came across?
Honestly, I feel like we touched on all the bases. Like, it's been so much fun exchanging ideas and opinions with you about him. He just will never cease to, like, fascinate me.
He is one of the most fascinating and hilarious characters that I've covered in this season so far.
Definitely.
Thank you so much, Mary. It's always such a joy and so wonderful to hear your thoughts and your insight about horror.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Always a pleasure to talk to you, Anna.